In the winter of 1887, two sisters stood before a cracked mirror in a candlelit parlor, one weeping, the other humming with a voice not her own. Outside, the snow muffled the screams that followed. Inside, a pact was kept, sealed not with ink, but with breath itself. London, 1887. Coal smoke veiled the streets, and in the heart of Bloomsbury stood a narrow brick townhouse that leaned as if burdened by secrets. Inside lived Eliza and Clara Morland, sisters born 2 years apart, their voices as different as day and dusk. Eliza, the elder, possessed a voice that drew audiences to tears, a contralto of haunting purity. Clara's, by cruel contrast, was fragile, breaking like glass under strain. Their father had once been a violinist for the Royal Theatre, but illness had stolen his music and his sanity. By 23, Eliza sang for the stage. By 21, Clara watched from the wings, trapped in silence she could not master. The sisters' bond was fierce, but it began to splinter the winter Eliza caught influenza. For days, her breathing rasped through the house like sandpaper on stone. Doctors came and went. Their powders did nothing. Clara sat beside her, listening, as that once glorious voice turned to a whisper. On the fourth night, Eliza awoke screaming. "It's going," she gasped. "It's leaving me." Clara held her close, but Eliza's hand clamped around her wrist. "You'll take it, won't you?" she hissed. "You always wanted it. You wanted my gift." Clara recoiled, horrified, but Eliza's fevered eyes gleamed with something otherworldly. At midnight, as the house settled and the frost climbed the windows, a sound rose from the parlor below. A melody, soft, mournful, like a prayer, sung backward. Clara descended and found a woman seated by the hearth, cloaked in black lace. The firelight showed no face beneath the veil. "You wish to sing as she did," the woman whispered. "I can make it so." Clara's heart pounded. "At what cost?" The stranger smiled. "A fair one. One voice for 2 souls." By dawn, Eliza's fever had broken, and her voice was gone. Clara, trembling, opened her mouth to call for help, and a sound poured out, deep, flawless, and utterly alien. Eliza stared at her in horror. The stranger was gone. Only the faint scent of lilac lingered in the air, though no flowers bloomed in winter. That morning, the neighbors swore they heard 2 voices singing from the moorland house, one above, one below, harmonizing perfectly, until the sound abruptly ceased. At first, Clara thought it was a miracle. When she spoke, the words came rich and resonant, gliding through the room with a power she had never known. Eliza, pale and trembling, sat by the window, unable to form more than a rasping breath. Their father's portrait above the mantel seemed to watch the change with grim disapproval, the flickering lamplight giving his painted eyes a strange, disquieted gleam. When Clara tried to comfort her sister, the sound that left her throat made Eliza flinch. "That's my voice," she whispered hoarsely. "You're speaking with what's mine." Clara denied it, but the tone, the inflection, the tremor of emotion, was unmistakable. Even the way she laughed, hesitant and musical, mirrored Eliza perfectly. The house felt colder each night. Footsteps echoed in rooms long empty. Mirrors, warped, reflecting 2 figures where there should have been one. It wasn't long before Clara was asked to perform in Eliza's place at the Rose Hill Theatre. The director, unaware of what had transpired, welcomed her eagerly. The first night she sang, the audience rose to its feet. They said her voice was transcendent, like hearing grief itself made beautiful. But behind the curtain, Eliza watched, her hands shaking, tears cutting through her powder. That evening, Clara returned home to find her sister gone from her bed. Only a few lines were scrawled on a scrap of music paper. "You can keep the voice, but I'll take what's left of the silence." Clara searched the house through the night, the candles burning low. In the cellar, she found footprints in the ash near the old coal chute, bare, small, unmistakably Eliza's. She followed them down until she reached the wall. There, in the faint light, she saw something wet glistening across the bricks, as though the wall itself had been weeping. When she pressed her ear against it, she heard a hum, a sound just below human pitch, vibrating softly through the stone. Then a whisper. "You took her song. Now she sings for me." Clara fled, stumbling into the street, her voice catching in her throat. When she tried to scream, no sound came. Not a note, not a breath. By morning, her voice returned, but something had changed. It now carried an echo, as if two people spoke through her at once, one mournful, one cruelly calm. And that night, for the first time, Clara dreamed of the woman in the black veil. She stood in the parlor again, whispering, "The bargain is never paid in full. There's still one voice left to claim." Winter deepened. The moorland house, once filled with music, now pulsed with uneasy silence. Only Clara's rehearsals broke the stillness. Low, mournful melodies that echoed through the corridors long after she stopped singing. But lately, she began to hear another voice join. Her own. Faint, fragile, familiar. It came from beneath the floor. At first, she thought it was imagination, some trick of grief and guilt. But one night, while practicing a hymn in the parlor, the harmony answered her again. Clear this time, matching her note for note. It was Eliza's voice, singing in perfect unison. Clara froze, the candle trembling in her hand. "Eliza," she whispered. The echo came again, slightly delayed, as if traveling through layers of earth. "Eliza." She knelt to the floor, pressing her ear against the old oak boards. The sound was unmistakable. Soft breaths, then the creak of movement. And beneath it, a faint scraping, like fingers brushing the underside of the wood. That night, Clara pried up one of the planks. Beneath lay only darkness and the faint scent of lilac. She dropped the plank, heart racing, and fled upstairs. Yet the singing continued. The next morning, she sought help from Father Renwick, the parish priest. The old man had known the sisters since childhood and listened gravely as she recounted her story. "The soul," he said, "is the breath made divine. If a bargain was made with breath, child, it cannot be undone." He handed her a small silver crucifix. "Hang this where you sleep, and whatever answers you from beneath that floor, do not sing with it." But that night, the temptation proved too strong. As the wind moaned through the chimney, the harmony returned, sweeter now, almost pleading. Clara closed her eyes. The melody was their mother's lullaby, one only Eliza could remember in full. She sang back. The house groaned. The air thickened, heavy as water. The flame of the candle bent toward the floor as if drawn downward. The crucifix on the wall rattled violently, falling to the ground with a metallic cry. Then came a whisper. From below, low, rasping, grateful. "Now, we're together." The sound that followed was not singing. It was breathing, long, steady, rhythmic, like lungs beneath the floor. By dawn, the boards had swelled with moisture, the nails blackened as though burned from within. And when Clara finally dared to speak again, her voice cracked into two distinct tones, one her own and one that belonged to her sister. The morning after the singing, the house had changed. The air felt thick, clinging to the lungs like damp smoke. Every sound, creaking wood, dripping pipes, whispering drafts, seemed to mimic a voice she couldn't quite place. Clara avoided the parlor, where the boards still bulged slightly, as though the house itself had taken a deep, living breath. But the true horror began in the mirror. In the old guest room, a gilt-edged mirror hung from the wall, a family heirloom their mother once used while teaching them how to braid their hair. When Clara looked into it now, she saw her own face, pale and exhausted, until it smiled back, before she did. At first, she thought it was fatigue, yet each day the reflection grew bolder. Sometimes it blinked out of sync. Other times, its lips moved after hers, mouthing words she hadn't spoken. Then one morning, as she brushed her hair, the reflection leaned forward, though Clara's body had not moved. Its eyes glistened, bright and feverish. Then, in a whisper that came not through her ears but from inside her head, it said, You shouldn't have stopped singing. Clara stumbled backward, striking the dresser. The sound echoed through the empty house, but when she turned again, her reflection was perfectly still, obedient, lifeless glass. That night, she covered the mirror with a black cloth, yet sleep did not come easily. The wind outside carried a faint melody, the same lullaby, and beneath it, a new voice began to speak in fragments. You promised me one voice, forever. Clara woke in a sweat, the cloth gone from the mirror. It lay neatly folded on the floor, as though placed there by invisible hands. Her reflection stared back, smiling faintly. By morning, Father Renwick's warnings returned to her mind. If a bargain was made with breath, she hadn't told him everything, hadn't confessed that she and Eliza had once stood before the wishing well behind the chapel, whispering vows into the dark water. Eliza had asked for a single perfect voice, to sing so purely that heaven would listen. Clara, out of love, had whispered the same. Now, the well seemed to answer. The mirror began to hum. It started low, vibrating like a struck string, filling the room with a tremor that rattled the glass. Clara screamed and hurled the crucifix at it. The mirror didn't shatter. It rippled. Her reflection stepped closer. And in that instant, Clara realized the voice in the mirror wasn't Eliza's ghost at all. It was her own soul, divided and devouring itself. The wishing well had been there long before the town itself, older than the chapel, older than the parish graveyard that crept ever closer to its crumbling rim. Villagers said it predated Christendom, that once it was a shrine where women whispered to something older than God. Most avoided it, but the Devane sisters did not. On that summer night, years ago, the air had been heavy with lilac and dust. Clara and Eliza were 16, barefoot, and full of impossible dreams. Eliza had been the singer, her voice bright and untouchable, capable of silencing even the drunkards who lingered outside the tavern at dusk. Clara was quieter, the harmony that supported her sister's light. That night, Eliza had cried. Their mother had fallen ill, and no doctor could soothe her. If only I could sing something beautiful enough, Eliza whispered, staring into the black water below. Maybe heaven would hear. Clara remembered reaching for her hand. Then sing, she said softly. I'll sing with you. But Eliza shook her head. No, it must be one voice, just one. Perfect. It was then she made the vow. Her words fell like stones down the well. Take whatever you must, my fear, my pain, my soul. Just let me sing for her. And when Clara, trembling, repeated the vow beside her, she thought it only symbolic. The well's echo returned their voices, intertwined, rising in a strange harmony that did not belong to either of them. From that night forward, Eliza's gift grew unnatural. She could sustain a single note so pure that glass quivered and men wept. But her health began to fail. Her skin turned pallid, her sleep restless, her laughter hollow. Clara begged her to stop singing. Eliza refused. When their mother died, Eliza didn't cry. She sang at the funeral, the hymn so haunting that even the priest forgot his prayer. Then she collapsed. The villagers said it was grief that silenced her voice forever. But Clara knew better. Now, years later, as the mirror's reflection whispered and the house trembled with invisible echoes, Clara understood what Father Renwick had meant. The bargain had not ended with Eliza's death. The vow had bound them both to something waiting in the dark water, something that now wanted its due. As the wind outside began to hum that same impossible harmony, Clara felt the pull again. A whisper rose from the well below the floorboards. Sing, and she will return. She clutched her throat. The voice wasn't Eliza's this time. It was hers, and something else beneath it, ancient and patient. The first sound came just before dawn, a low vibration beneath the boards, like the resonance of a distant choir carried through stone. Clara woke to find the candle burned down to a stump, its wax pooled and hardened like bone. The house was utterly still, yet the sound persisted, threading through the walls like a living pulse. She pressed her ear to the floor. It wasn't wind. It wasn't the house settling. It was singing. Dozens of voices, faint, uneven, yet harmonized in a way no human choir could achieve. Some tones were impossibly high, others deep enough to rattle the marrow in her teeth. The melody rose and fell like breath, familiar, sorrowful, unending. Clara whispered, "Eliza." A pause. Then, faintly, her own name echoed back through the boards. For a moment she almost answered. But something in the timbre of that voice, too calm, too precise, froze her tongue. It wasn't Eliza. It was what had taken Eliza. She staggered back, knocking over the candle. Darkness swallowed the room. The sound grew louder until it filled the air itself. Furniture creaked, dust trembled from the rafters, and through it all, Clara could hear fragments of words, half prayers, half pleas, in languages she didn't recognize. She stumbled toward the parlor, where the mirror stood. Its surface was fogged as if it too were breathing. And then she saw it. Faint impressions, faces layered over one another, eyes open in silent song. Some were women she remembered from town, tenants who had vanished. Others, strangers. One face, unmistakably, was Eliza's. Her sister's. Lips were moving, but no sound came from them. The music rose from somewhere deeper, like the earth itself had become a throat. Clara fell to her knees, clutching her head as the voices merged into one unbearable note that seemed to pull the air out of the room. Then, silence. The boards beneath her feet were wet. She touched the surface and pulled her hand away, slick with something dark and warm. It wasn't blood. It was thicker, wax-like. It smelled faintly of lilacs. The mirror flickered once more. Eliza's reflection looked straight at her, mouthing words Clara could now read clearly. "You promised me forever." The floor gave a single groan, as though the house itself had taken a breath. The wax began to seep through the seams, slowly hardening into shapes, fingers, mouths, eyes. The house was not haunted. It was hungry. And Clara, trembling, realized the choir beneath the floor was still missing one voice. By morning, Clara's hair was matted with dust and candle soot. Her dress clung to her skin, still damp from the night's terrors, but she could not leave. Not yet. Something tethered her to the house, not duty, not grief, but the dreadful certainty that if she left, the voices would follow. The townsfolk kept their distance. Only one dared to approach, Mrs. Amelie Voss, the former caretaker. Her figure appeared at the gate that afternoon, hunched and trembling beneath a heavy shawl. She had worked for the previous tenants, the last 4 who had disappeared, the ones whose names no longer appeared on parish rolls. Clara opened the door cautiously. The woman didn't cross the threshold. Her eyes darted to the floorboards, then to the parlor mirror. "You shouldn't have stayed," she rasped. "No, one stays after the 6th night." Clara swallowed. "You knew my sister." Mrs. Voss's mouth twitched. "I knew the songs." The words struck Clara cold. The old woman told her how, after Eliza's death, the house had been abandoned for years. Then came tenants, painters, musicians, travelers, all drawn by rumors of strange acoustics, of echoes that carried farther than they should. Each one claimed to hear music when they slept. Each one lasted less than a month. They said, "It began under the floor," Mrs. Voss whispered, gripping the doorframe so hard her knuckles whitened. Then it moved to the walls. Then it started singing with them. Clara stared. "And you stayed through it all?" Her eyes filled with tears. "I couldn't leave. It doesn't let you." She lifted her sleeve. Her arm was coated in a faint sheen, not sweat, not oil, but wax, pale and translucent. It shimmered in the sunlight. When I tried to flee, it marked me, said I was unfinished. A shiver ran down Clara's spine. Mrs. Voss's voice dropped to a whisper. It feeds on unfinished things, songs left unsung, promises left unkept. It began with your sister. It will end with you. Then, before Clara could answer, the old woman turned and walked away, disappearing down the road without once looking back. Inside, the house seemed to sigh. The air thickened, as though holding its breath. The mirror flickered again, and now, among the ghostly faces within, Clara saw another appear. Mrs. Voss. Her mouth opened in a silent scream, her reflection sealed behind the glass. The candle beside it sputtered and went out, and from somewhere, deep below, the choir resumed, louder this time, more insistent. One voice remains, it sang. By nightfall, the house had swallowed every trace of daylight. The shutters refused to open, and the air hung heavy with the scent of melting wax. Clara sat before the cracked parlor mirror, Eliza's songbook resting in her lap, the same book their mother had once forbidden them to touch. Its pages were warped from years of moisture, the ink smudged in places, but one page gleamed as though freshly written. The title read simply, Cantus Unus, one voice. Beneath it were verses neither of them had ever learned, not notes but symbols, strange curling marks like vines twisted into knots. At the bottom, written in Eliza's careful hand, were the words, The voice is a vessel. The vessel must be shared. Clara's fingers trembled as she traced the letters. The symbols shimmered faintly, as if reacting to her touch. She turned. The page and a brittle scrap of parchment fluttered loose. It was a fragment of a letter, addressed to Eliza, dated 1862, from a man named August Thorne, a composer excommunicated for writing music unfit for the living. The letter spoke of an ancient rite practiced by women in remote monasteries, a vow sung in perfect unison, believed to merge the souls of its singers into a single eternal voice. But it warned, if the vow is broken, the voice will hunger until it is made whole. Clara felt the words burn behind her eyes. The vow, the well, the choir. It all fit. Eliza hadn't just sung for their mother. She had opened something. Her hands moved without thought, finding the melody on the piano's broken keys. Each note she pressed seemed to vibrate through the floor, as if the very foundation of the house recognized it. The walls began to hum in sympathy. From the parlor mirror, faint shapes leaned forward, translucent, expectant, and then Eliza's reflection appeared once more. Her expression was no longer sorrowful. It was pleading. Finish it, she mouthed. Sing it with me. The piano lid slammed shut, splintering the silence. Clara gasped. Her throat felt tight, as though something coiled within it, rising. The room shuddered. From beneath the boards, that same impossible harmony began, now joined by whispers calling her name. Clara clutched the songbook to her chest. She knew now what the entity wanted. Completion. If she sang, it might end, or she might vanish like the others, folded into the eternal chorus beneath the house. Her reflection smiled faintly, Eliza's smile. One voice, sister, it whispered from the mirror. You promised forever. The first note escaped Clara's lips before she could stop it. It began with a single trembling note, soft, uncertain, but the moment it left Clara's lips, the house responded. Every wall, every beam, every buried cavity of that ancient structure began to resonate with her. It was as though the house itself had been waiting centuries to breathe again. Her voice rose, clear and haunting, and the songbook on her lap fluttered, open of its own accord. The symbols on the pages glowed faintly, pulsing with rhythm like veins beneath skin. The mirror rippled, no longer reflecting the room but something deeper, a vast chamber of shifting shadows, where hundreds of faint silhouettes stood, their mouths open in silent harmony. Clara's breath hitched, but the melody carried her, onward. Each phrase brought a wave of warmth through her chest, intoxicating, almost euphoric. The air thickened with invisible pressure, the kind that fills the lungs and steels the will, and then, beneath her melody, another voice joined, Eliza's. It came from everywhere and nowhere, a pure, crystalline tone that merged with Clara's. Perfectly. Too perfectly. Their voices locked together until it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. The floorboards pulsed like a heartbeat beneath her feet. The wax that had seeped from the cracks earlier now began to move, slowly sculpting itself into shapes. Hands, faces, open mouths frozen in eternal song. The air stank of lilacs and candle smoke. Clara tried to stop, but her lips kept moving, the notes forcing themselves out like a confession. Her throat burned. Her eyes watered. She was no longer singing with Eliza. She was being hollowed out, reshaped into an instrument. The mirror's surface flared with light. Inside, she saw her sister, radiant, ethereal, surrounded by the missing tenants. They were no longer suffering. They were singing. For one fleeting moment, Clara felt peace, the kind that comes with surrender. Then, the note shifted. Too sharp. The harmony cracked. The room convulsed. The piano exploded into splinters. The fa. Faces in the mirror twisted, screaming. The songbook burst into flame, filling the air with acrid smoke. Clara's voice shattered into a gasp. The mirror trembled violently, and from its center, Eliza's hand reached outward, fingers made of dripping wax. "Don't stop," her sister hissed. "You're almost free." But Clara, choking, backed away. "Free?" she whispered. "You mean finished?" The house roared like a cathedral collapsing, and the last thing she heard before darkness swallowed her was that same echoing phrase, now spoken in 1,000 overlapping voices. One voice. Forever. When Clara awoke, the silence was absolute. Not the quiet of peace, but of absence. The kind that pressed against the skull until every heartbeat sounded like a scream. She lay on the parlor floor amid splintered wood and curls of smoke. The mirror cracked into a web of fractured reflections. The wax had cooled around her like a second skin, binding her wrists to the floorboards. Each movement tore at her flesh. She called out, her voice hoarse and foreign. It echoed weakly, not through air, but through the house itself. Then she realized what was missing. The choir, the endless harmony beneath the boards. Gone. The house had fallen completely silent. Even the wind outside seemed to have stopped. Slowly, she freed herself, snapping the thin film of wax that held her. The air was thick with the scent of lilac and burnt oil. The songbook lay in ashes beside the hearth, its pages curling inward like dying petals. She looked to the mirror. Dozens of faces still lingered there, faint outlines suspended in the fractured glass. All were still, their mouths closed. Except one. Eliza. Her sister's reflection stared back at her, serene, almost human again. The waxen texture that had covered her before was gone, replaced by pale, translucent light. "It's over," Clara whispered. Eliza's expression softened. Then slowly she shook her head. Behind her the faintest movement rippled, shadows stretching, bending. The other faces began to fade one by one, until only Eliza remained. "You ended the song," Eliza said, not aloud, but inside Clara's mind. But something else began. The walls gave a subtle creak, like the house inhaling. The boards beneath Clara's feet were warm again. She stumbled backward, realizing the wax wasn't melting this time. It was breathing. The floor rose slightly with every exhale. The cracks in the mirror widened, splintering Eliza's reflection into 7 pieces. Each fragment showed her face in a different emotion: joy, grief, rage, longing. And they all began to move independently, whispering over one another. "You silenced us," one hissed. "You stole the harmony," murmured another. "You were supposed to join us," said a third. Clara covered her ears, but the voices were inside her now, vibrating behind her eyes. She staggered toward the front door. But where the handle should have been, there was only smooth wax. The silence deepened into a low hum. The house trembled, and from somewhere beneath her feet came a final mournful sigh, like an organ note fading into eternity. Clara whispered to no one, "Then take it. Take the rest of me." The boards beneath her feet cracked open. A warm golden light poured through. She stepped forward. When the house finally stilled again, it was empty, except for the faintest sound, a single steady breath coming from the parlor mirror. When they found the house months later, it was silent, but not abandoned. The air inside was unnaturally still, as though sound itself had been drained from the walls. Dust floated in thick shafts of light, yet there were no footprints, no trace of disturbance. Only one object seemed untouched by time: the mirror. The new caretaker, a laborer hired to clear the estate, claimed he could hear faint singing when he entered the parlor. He thought it came from outside, carried on the wind. But when he looked closer, he realized the sound was coming from the glass. At first it was beautiful, a single, perfect soprano tone, trembling just above human hearing. But then, if he listened longer, it began to split. One voice became two became four, until it was impossible to tell how many there were. And beneath that melody, a whisper, soft, intimate, pleading, "Stay." He fled the same evening. No one else dared to enter after him. The estate was boarded up, its history left to rot with the last entry in the parish registry: Clara Devane, presumed missing 1882. But some nights, when fog creeps through the valley, locals say the house glows faintly from within, as though lit by candlelight. Those who pass too close claim they can hear singing, a harmony so pure it makes their chest ache. If they linger, it begins to mirror their breathing, their heartbeat, until they swear they can feel another presence humming through their ribs. Inside, the parlor remains untouched. The mirror, cracked but gleaming, hangs above the cold fireplace. If you stand before it long enough, the reflections seem to shift. Two women, side by side. Their faces are calm, their eyes closed, as if listening. And sometimes, if the light catches right, one of them opens her mouth. No sound escapes, at first. But if you wait, and if the house decides it remembers you, a single note will emerge. Soft, familiar. A human voice blended with something older, something that no longer needs lungs or language. The voice never stops. It only waits. And if you whisper your name to the mirror, the song will change, ever so slightly, as if to make room for you. So tell me, if you stood there, hearing that perfect, endless harmony, would you listen? Or would you run before the house remembered your voice too?